Welcome back to the channel, everyone. It's I, the Reluctant Gringo, back again with another video. You know I love Star Wars, but you may not know that the other side of my pop culture coin is the Dark Knight himself, Batman. He was the first comic book I picked up from the newsstand over 40 years ago, and he's remained my #1 hero. Over the years, many films have tried to tell a great Batman story, some better than others. Here is my ranking of the 12 live-action Batman films from worst to best. The only criteria is that Batman had to have a major role in the film to qualify. So Suicide Squad, you're out of contention. And with that, let's begin. Number 12, Batman and Robin. Let's get this first entry out of the way as quickly as possible. Bat nipples, bat ice skates, a bat credit card. It is unwise to try to be 1966 in the year 1997, which is what Joel Schumacher's franchise killer attempted to do. What should have been a slam dunk. George Clooney at his peak as Batman, Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy, and Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze. What we got instead is a movie that became infamous for just how bad it is. Even the director apologized to the fans afterwards for doing what he did to the source material. Normally, even a terrible Batman movie has an act, a scene, even a line that is memorable in positive light, except this one. Any aspect of movie making, directing, writing, acting, you name it, it was atrocious. Hell, I bet even the craft services sucked. Enough about this one. Let's move on. Number 11, The Flash. This movie, more so than any other on this list, was doomed before it even hit theaters. Ezra Miller was never a fan favorite to play the titular role, even before their off-screen alleged criminal activities. The fact that this movie was supposed to reset the DCU for all future films to come was a monumental task in and of itself. It did not need these complications, nor did it need poor execution of the CGI or the extensive reshoots. But what it did have was Michael Keaton reprising his role as Batman. This should have been enough to make this movie at least profitable, right? Wrong. The script could not even get this correct. When we think of 1989 Batman, we think dark, gothic, gliding over buildings, living in the shadows, beating criminals up with his fists. Instead, we got a Batman that spent most of his time in a vehicle fighting Kryptonians in a desert, in the brightest of sunlight. It just did not work. And never mind that we had two other Batmans in this movie, Ben Affleck and George Clooney, although Clooney was a short cameo as Bruce Wayne, but still, so much Batman, so little enjoyment. The movie was a flop, and it deserved to be. But worse than a flop financially, it was a disappointment to the fans. Number 10, Zack Snyder's Justice League. Now I say Zack Snyder's Justice League because regardless of which version you watch, the one where Joss Whedon stepped in to finish the film or the fan-requested Snyder Cut, Batman spent most of this film trying to be a leader, to gather a team, to be working well with others. Even Commissioner Gordon had a line in the film about how out of character this was for Batman. Even the Justice League cartoons understood how much Batman was a lone wolf. There were attempts at comedy, at one-liners, even Aquaman getting one in on Batman's expense. Whoever wrote the film either did not know or forgot who Batman really is. And we haven't even covered the narrative, which was a muddled mess of exposition, flashback, and over-reliance on coincidence. In the end, the secret to a great Batman film is the execution of the conflict between the Dark Knight and the main villain. As I write this, even I had to pause and remember that Steppenwolf was the villain. That's how insignificant the threat he posed was. In short, this film was an attempt to catch up with Marvel, to cash in on the success of the Avengers. A superhero team-up movie that didn't put in the work necessary to establish the characters, put in the work for the audience to have any investment or sense of finality to it that a film like the Avengers or Endgame earned. Number 9, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. This story had been one that fans of Batman and Superman had been wanting for decades on the big screen. Maybe more than any other superhero movie crossover, this was probably the most anticipated, which may be why it was so disappointing. It just tried to do too much. Batman as a character was better defined and contained more fidelity to the source material than Justice League. Superman, well, just picking a fight with another vigilante seemed like a very thin motivation for the Man of Steel. The film was hampered with subplots that seemed forced, like the introduction of Wonder Woman into this timeline or the political story involving a Senate subcommittee, when all we really wanted was the two main characters to have a conflict that was believable and to go at it. We certainly did not need the Doomsday storyline tacked on towards the end. There was little buildup and therefore little emotional payoff with Superman's death. Ben Affleck's turn in this film was his best, but his efforts got lost amongst so much going on. A better writer or director would have seen the potential of a trilogy with all this material. As my father used to tell me, it's never a good idea to try to shove 10 pounds of shit into a 5-pound bag. Number 8, Batman, 1966. I can hear you typing in the comment section already, but yes, this movie is way better than the previous entries. Why? Because it knows what it wants to be. Campy? Check. Silly and filled with quirky comedy? Check. Batusi? Check. Some of the most wonderful portrayals of Batman villains ever? Double and triple check. The movie, like the television series it was spawned from, was successful because of the unrelenting line of talented actors who stepped up to play the big bad guys. Burgess Meredith as the Penguin, Frank Gorshin's Riddler, Cesar Romero's Joker, mustache and all, and Julie Newmar's Catwoman were ripped straight out of the Silver Age of comics and plastered on the big screen. The story centered on world domination, which was worthy of the OG supervillain crossover. But let's get to the heart of the matter. Adam West as Batman. I know, he's nothing like the Batman we know from the comics, but still, his Batman was his Batman, and he was having a blast playing the role and doing his best to bring honor to the character. And in the end, isn't that the most important aspect of taking on any iconic role? And I'm looking at you, Jared Leto. So this film is higher on the list, but not too high. It is a throwback, a nostalgic look at what pop culture meant in the late 60s, where they tried to make it accessible to their modern audience while having a protective hold on the legacy of Batman as something more than just a mere comic book icon. Number 7. Batman Forever. Jim Carrey. That's it. That's what made this film a decent Batman film. Was the writing great? No. Was Val Kilmer a great Batman? No. He was basically a placeholder who never seemed that invested in the role, and soon after he would self-destruct as a professional actor, ruining his career. Tommy Lee Jones was trying too hard to be Jack Nicholson being Two-Face instead of finding his own take on the role. The introduction of a more family-friendly, a more campy, and a more marketable story was heavily influenced by the backlash from Batman Returns and its very adult content in a very comic book movie, and the overcorrection shows here in Batman Forever. But, like I said, Carrey was the Riddler. You could tell he did his homework, that he had studied Frank Gorshin and even John Astin before crafting his own version of what was considered a B-list villain for the Batman at the time. Over the top and too reliant on a romance and too eager to insert stupidity like martial arts laundry care, Batman Forever may not have been the end of a franchise because it did make the most money that year over any other film. Again, see Jim Carrey. But it did encourage the producers, the director, and the studio to double down on the neon and the cringe. Number 6. Batman Begins. Christopher Nolan took up the challenge of bringing the Dark Knight back into the public eye with this take on Batman's origin story in Batman Begins. This movie has a lot of positives. It is beautifully shot, and the story is grounded and allows the audience to believe in the characters and their motivations. But it is slow at times, sometimes excruciatingly slow, such as when Bruce talks with Rachel in any scene that she's in. And that may be poor casting or poor chemistry between the leads, but regardless, it's there, and this lack of connection between the film and the audience becomes a detriment to the overall aesthetic of the movie. The relationship between Batman and Ra's al Ghul is much more intriguing, but it's only there at the beginning and a little bit at the end. The middle acts are left without an anchor, and it seems that no relationship that Batman has, even with Alfred or Jim Gordon, feels authentic. Did the film complete the job of reimagining the Batman for a new generation of fans? Yes, but it did not achieve the kind of grandiosity or pop culture impression that the next 5 films were able to achieve. As far as this list goes, this is a transitional film that moves us from the terrible to the good and hopefully to the great. Number 5. The Dark Knight Rises. The closing chapter of any trilogy is a tough landing to stick, even for a director as talented as Christopher Nolan. Even he knew that, not wanting to do a third movie and leave The Dark Knight as the ending of his story, partly because of Ledger's death and partly because Nolan didn't think there was a way to truly escalate the tension and stakes of what came before. He even had this perspective with the original Batman Begins, being hesitant to make The Dark Knight. The key word here is escalation. Nolan knew that each successive sequel needed to up the ante on our hero and present an even greater danger than previous narratives. When watching The Dark Knight Rises with this lens, then the movie makes a whole lot more sense. Drawing upon the No Man's Land story arc from the comics, Nolan gives us Bane, not only a physical threat to Batman, but a psychological and intellectual one as well. Tom Hardy got a lot of flack for his portrayal initially, and the character did seem undefined for general audiences, but there is no question that Hardy's performance instilled tension and fear, what every great villain should do. Christian Bale needed to match this overpowering figure with a performance that was more vulnerable, something that most Batman fans are not used to seeing. Whether from age, from injury, or from the reluctant need to have allies, Batman finished the Nolan trilogy by shedding all of the mystique that Batman presents as a character. Was it bad? No, not really. Did it work within the context of the story and the need for escalation that Nolan was shooting for? Absolutely. The Dark Knight Rises suffered from having too many subplots and narrative strands all pulling on each other for satisfactory screen time. However, this does not sink the movie, and it still stands out as a great Batman movie that closed the book on Nolan's Gotham. Number 4. Batman Returns. There is no denying that Tim Burton has a unique directing style and visual palette, and these are on full display in Batman Returns, the sequel to the immensely successful 1989 film Batman. As Nolan understood with his trilogy, escalation is the key to a great sequel, and Burton managed this by including not one, but 2 villains for Batman to battle against. And as far as villain portrayals in Batman films go, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman and Danny DeVito's Penguin are at the top of the list with Ledger's Joker and Gorshin's Riddler. Set around Christmas time in Gotham, and we can argue whether this is a Christmas film or not in the comment section, Batman Returns sees Michael Keaton return to the role of the Dark Knight in a Gotham that is filled with contrast. The Christmas holiday spirit competing with Gotham's gothic decor. A comic book hero who does not kill, obviously upping his own violence as he battles the Penguin's gang to include killing. Michelle Pfeiffer's sexualized Catwoman paired with DeVito's grotesque Penguin. And while it was met with a lot of criticism for some of its more adult themes and dialogue, Batman Returns was a film that saw Keaton's Batman stretched to his limits by both Penguin and Catwoman, leading him to use both his daytime role as Bruce Wayne and his alter ego as Batman to thwart the duo. Most sequels cannot match up to the original film, especially when they are a global phenomenon such as the original Batman from '89, and Burton knew this, so he made a film that was fun, with deep character development, and gave zero cares about trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice. By doing so, Burton gave us a sequel that has only grown in popularity over the years, and one of the best Batman films because it literally looks and feels like a comic book come to life. Number 3. The Batman. Matt Reeves took on the task of creating a new Batman after Nolan's seemingly unmatchable trilogy from the early 2000s. He had 2 choices, the Schumacher approach or the Nolan approach, lighter or darker, and he went darker, much darker, and that was the right choice. Robert Pattinson had, by then, shed his Twilight image and established himself as one of the most capable actors around. His Batman was a young one, the film taking place during only his 2nd year as the Bat. He was more brooding than Bale's performance, and he was more tortured than Keaton's, and it worked. From the soundtrack to the set design to the minimal dialogue that Pattinson spoke, this Batman was a true beast, and one that had not yet found the word restraint. There is something unhinged about Pattinson's portrayal, and it only adds to the tension in the film, leaving audiences wondering who was the Batman's true enemy, the criminals or his own penchant for going too far. And the darkening did not stop there. Jim Gordon had a more cynical and rebellious take. Catwoman was purposely left balancing between villain and hero perfectly. The Penguin was given a more quietly vicious but patient attitude, and the Riddler was turned into a shadowy, malevolent force covering Gotham in fear and chaos, like the real-life Zodiac killer in San Francisco in the late 1960s. Despite all of these changes, all of the characters remained faithful to their source material. Yes, the movie was a bit long, and some of the Riddler's schemes seemed a bit tainted with current-day political and social commentary, but these things exist and they are real, and therefore we have to accept them as fair game for inclusion into a modern-day Batman storyline. The Batman is one of the best superhero films to be released in the past 10 years, and audiences cannot wait for the next chapter. Number 2. Batman. Comic book movies were not a serious thing in the 1980s, and really, only 1978 Superman was taken seriously as a great film from the genre. That is until Warner Brothers and Tim Burton released Batman. If you were not around at the time, it may be difficult for you to understand just how much hype and anticipation there was for this film. Michael Keaton is Batman, and Jack Nicholson is the Joker. This casting alone let fans of The Dark Knight know that the 1960s campy Batman was not going to be anywhere near this film. And really, until 1989, the 1960s television series was the only live-action Batman that we knew. The film was dubbed the movie of the decade, and that's saying something when talking about the 1980s. Dark and serious in tone, taking itself serious so audiences could have that same permission. Keaton's portrayal stunned and delighted us, and Nicholson is still, for some, arguably the greatest Joker there is. This movie legitimized a comic book movie. Without it, you do not get Fox's X-Men universe, you do not get independent cult favorites like Darkman, you may not have gotten the MCU. Is there a genuine and authentic critique of this movie? Yeah, it retconned the Joker's identity from unknown to the killer of Batman's parents. But we got over it because there was synergy in the fact that they created each other. Did Keaton's suit not allow him to turn his head? Yeah, but really, aren't we just nitpicking at this point? Tim Burton's Batman is a masterpiece in cinema, and only another great director, with another great cast and script, would ever be able to surpass it as the greatest Batman film ever made. And that's exactly what we got. Number 1. The Dark Knight. The term perfect movie gets thrown around a lot these days. Everyone has their opinion about which movie is the perfect one. Well, here's mine. Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight is a perfect movie. There is nothing in this movie that anyone can legitimately say is a major drag on the film. Great directing? Check. Incredible script? Check. Amazing cinematography, practical effects, set and costume design? Check. The most legendary performance of any villain, not just comic book villain, any villain. Since Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back, you better believe, check. Every performance in The Dark Knight was perfect. Batman, Alfred, Commissioner Gordon, Rachel, Harvey Dent, every one of them was flawless. But they were still overshadowed by Heath Ledger, who gave a performance as the Joker that is the type of performance that will live forever, be referenced forever, be imitated forever, and will never be matched. Some things are just too perfect that replicating them becomes impossible. The Dark Knight is a perfect film, not just a perfect Batman film. It is the high bar that all of the superhero films seek to reach, but never can. Sure, others may have made a ton more money, but let's face it, they only lasted for a moment in pop culture before getting sorted back into the ocean of time. But not The Dark Knight. It stands alone as the greatest comic book movie ever made, and one of the 10 best films produced in the last 50 years. If you have not seen this movie, or you're hesitant for some reason, whatever that may be, get over it and watch this film. You'll drive your family and your friends crazy for days as you try to process the perfection you just watched and wonder why studios choose to churn out mediocre film after mediocre film, month after month. And that's my list, and that's my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. As well, let me know what superhero movie you're looking forward to next, if any. And if you enjoyed this top 10 and you want more arguments, click on the links to the end cards for my ranking of the Star Wars franchise and my top 10 comedies of all time. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm still your reluctant gringo from south of the border. Salud and au revoir.